this, that the world owes me this. And so when I don't get what I think I deserve, they begin to whine and begin to complain. In Exodus 14, verse 11, and when they said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? We were so happy when we were slaves, but now you've brought us out of there. Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than die in the desert." Doesn't it sort of sound like us? I'm so grateful that God did this for me, but now I'm going to complain about it, because what have you done for me lately, God? What have you done for me lately, God? How come I can't get this? You know, add insult to injury, Moses said something that should have probably stunned you for a moment of silence. He said this about our complaining: "You're not grumbling against me, guys. Who are you complaining against? They're complaining against the Lord." Imagine if every time that we complain, it's not just our circumstances or about the traffic or about another person, but what if in God's eyes we're actually complaining about Him? And maybe that's the way He sees it. When we whine and cry about it's not fair and my life's not going the way I think I should and I didn't meet the right person, or my husband doesn't shave right, or my wife doesn't cook dinner very well, or my $2 million home is only worth $1.5 million now, and and I've got to go get the tires changed on my $1 million car. Don't worry, I don't have $1 million car. We complain when everything's given to us on a silver platter, and all we do is complain about it. And maybe it is that what we're really saying is, I don't trust God to give me the best. And so when bad things happen to us, when things don't go the way we should, we start complaining. And I really don't think what we're complaining against are each other or your boss. Because ultimately, God is sovereign. And when we start complaining and saying, well, this isn't fair, this isn't right, or this shouldn't be happening to me, what we're saying is God is allowing this to happen to me, and He's not fair. You know how I feel about this. God's never fair. I don't want God to be fair, because God would give me what I deserved. I'd be in trouble. But we get this mentality that God's in me. So what I want to do is I want to help you personalize this for you, and you're going to hear the message about the lens of your own complaining. And I want to ask you, what is it about that you complain about the most? I really want you to think about it, and I really want you to be honest with yourself. Kind of let it rise to the surface. For me, I think it's my job. I love my job, but I hate testing. And that's all I do. I wouldn't mind school as a teacher. We didn't have students. I could just do without the students. That kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? And the truth is, I've been doing it for almost 30 years. So as much as I might like to complain about it sometimes, I don't really want out of it. And honestly, you start complaining about things, and you suddenly realize that there are a lot of people out there that have it a lot worse than I do. That things are going so bad for them. And I'm so blessed. I tell you, the best thing that ever happened, when I was youth pastor at Del Rio Community Church years and years ago, they took the youth group to Guatemala for a mission trip. They went for 2 weeks. I didn't get to go. And I wish I had, because my youth group came back a whole different group of people. I swear, I think they kidnapped the old ones and sent back new ones, because they were changed. You know why they were changed? Because they learned gratitude. They got down there and they realized that they had running water in their home. They went to the grocery store to get food. They didn't have to haul water in a bucket up a mountain to their village so they had something to drink. A big dinner didn't consist of corn. I mean, they went to these people in Guatemala, and they were believers. They were helping to build a missionary compound, um, a church in the mountains. And these people were just so grateful for every little thing they got that they didn't complain. And I think our biggest issue is we don't have any gratitude because we're not grateful for what God gave us. And so we stop thinking about, well, God has given me this and this and this and this, and I'm so well off. God has so blessed me. I have a roof over my head. I have food to eat. I have a job that pays my bills, mostly. And God has taken care of me. I could be living on the street somewhere. So complaining comes from that lack of gratitude, that desire to say, God owes me and I'm not getting it. Oh, poor pitiful me. Some of you say you complain because you're not married, and you say, I wish I was married, and then those who are married complain because you're married. And you complain about your spouse, you complain about your kids. Maybe it's that you complain about what the money is tight, and that the house is too small, or the boss drives you crazy, or the meetings are too boring. It might be something similar, smaller than you complain about the weather is bad, or the Wi-Fi is slow, or there's nothing to watch on television and you're bored. And I'll go ahead and just clarify this and hope that you understand the problem really isn't the weather. The problem isn't the traffic. The problem really isn't that Netflix hasn't come up with a new original content that meets your approval rating. The problem is that we've taken our eyes off the goodness of God and we put them dead center on ourselves. That is the problem that leads to a constant curse of complaining. People who complain all the time have an I problem. Now, I'm not talking about E-Y-E. I'm talking about the letter I. I still remember a buddy of mine. He inherited this church. He got called there, and he was just so frustrated because all they ever did was backbite and talk and complain about everything. So one day he got up on a Sunday morning and he said, I'm having a funeral tonight for the person who's caused all the fighting in the church. He's died, and we're going to put him and we're going to have a funeral for him. And if you'll come tonight, you'll find out who it is, and we can lay him to rest. Well, everybody showed up. People that never came to church showed up because they wanted to see who was causing all the problems. So he had this coffin up front, and he preached a sermon. And he said, would you come by and pay your final respects to the person who has died, so that the death of this person is going to stop all the problems. So people get up and they go up and they look in the coffin and they come away with this really shocked look on their face. He had laid a full-length mirror on the bottom of the coffin. And his point was that you had to die to yourself to get your eyes off yourself. The I is always the problem for all of us because the big I is all I can. Me, my, I. And so what we do when we got an eye trouble, we start complaining. Because we've taken our focus off of who's really supposed to be the center of our universe and put ourselves back on the throne. Paul writes this, and if there's anyone who ever had the right to complain, if there's anybody who had the right to complain, it was Paul. The top thing on his bucket list was that he wanted to go to Rome to communicate the gospel. He knew that if he could go to Rome and reach the leaders in Rome, that he could have a chance of impacting the whole world. At the top of his list of things that he wanted to accomplish in life was to go to Rome and proclaim the gospel. And he got to go to Rome all right. He was arrested, finally went to Rome, and put in prison. The dream was to proclaim the gospel, and the reality is that he ends up as a prisoner. Not just a prisoner, but he was locked up for about 2 years, 24 hours a day. And every 8 hours, he had new Roman guards chained to him, awaiting his possible execution. The reality is, for most of us, we've been sitting in that thing, we've been complaining the whole time. Oh God, I can't believe you did this to me. It's not fair. Why are you allowing this to happen to me? I've served you. I've been faithful. If I'm the Apostle Paul, I've been shipwrecked. I've been beaten. I've been snake bit. I've been left for dead, and all I've done is serve you. Serve you, God. Why are you letting this happen to me? You know how strategic this city is. If you could just give me a shot at the city, let me go out there and preach. We could make a difference here. Instead, here I am as a prisoner. The floor is hard, the food is bad, and this Roman's body odor is so bad it makes me want to puke, even on him right now. That's kind of what would be going through my mind. Paul wasn't complaining, though. Instead of telling God why God got it wrong, this is what the apostle penned in the letter of Corinthians to the Christians in Philippi. Philippians 2:14 and 15. Paul said this. He said, Philippian believers, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Do everything without complaining. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Whatever you do, wherever you are, and whatever deed or word you do, everything without grumbling or complaining. There's a lot of practical reasons to talk about the spiritual reasons, but I want to spend just a moment and talk about one practical reasons. See, there's a doctor named Travis Bradberry. He wrote a great book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And he'd done a lot of research on the idea of complaining. And what he says is that repeated complaining hardwires the brain to complain more. In other words, the more negative you are, the more likely your brain is going to be triggered to continue to be negative. He and others talk about what it means just to have this kind of negative mindset, that before long we enter into what they call the confirmation bias. In other words, you expect something to be bad, therefore you get what you expect. That was the problem with the Israelites. They were negative when they were in captivity. They were negative when they were free because their negative mindset trained them to be even more negative, and this is incredibly dangerous. I don't know about you, but I don't want to go through life preconceived to find the bad when there's already enough bad out there. I want to train my mind to find what is good and that which is pleasant and that which is helpful and hopeful instead of always focusing on what's negative. And when you look at the Apostle Paul, the way he lived and what he taught, would communicate these two big ideas. To me, this is the heart of the message. And then I went back to unpack it in a way that hopefully will motivate in a very powerful way. Paul essentially, with the way he lived and what he would have taught, very likely would have said something like this. If you can change the circumstances, if there's something negative and you can do something about it, then do something about it. If there are negative circumstances, something that is not right, something that you wish you could change, and you can do something about it, then you do something about it. In other words, you're not going to go through life and pretend like everything's okay when it's not okay. It's not a sin to notice something that's not right. When it boils into sin, might be when we complain and complain and complain about it, and we don't ever do anything about it. You know, it's a little bit like Nehemiah. Nehemiah recognized the walls of Jerusalem were down, and he was really upset about it. And what did he do? He didn't run around and go, "Oh, woe is me, poor, pitiful us. It's the worst thing ever. Oh my gosh, the people are vulnerable. Why doesn't anybody do about it?" He was bothered by it, but he did something about it. He acted. And if there's something that you dislike, something that gives you a righteous dissatisfaction, if there is a godly discomfort, and you look at it and you say, this isn't right on behalf of God, don't complain about it. Don't just put comments on social media about it. Don't write it in Facebook. Get out with your life and do something about it. If there's a negative situation and you can change it, then bring your A game and change it. Now, at the same time, his teaching would have said this: if you can't change your circumstances, then change your perspective. If you can do something about it, do something about it. But if you can't, change your perspective, how you look at it. Change what you say about it. Change how you think about it. Change what you see in those circumstances. This to me is so powerful. And it says in Philippians 2:17-18. Remember now, he's chained between two Roman soldiers. He's awaiting his very possible execution. His dream was to preach the gospel, and he's locked up in prison. And this is what he says. He says, but even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from our faith, I'm glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. Even being poured out like a drink offering, I'm still glad. Now you're sitting there thinking, what does it mean to be poured out like a drink offering? Well, there's one Greek word that's translated in the whole little phrase. It's the word like to spend it all. This word is a very powerful little word that his audience would have understood. What the priest would do is they would make a sacrifice to God, maybe with a lamb or some type of animal, and they put it on a burnt offering, and they would take a drink offering, which would be the most expensive liquid they had, usually wine with a little honey, because honey was difficult and expensive to come by, and they would take their most expensive drink and they would pour it on top of the burning sacrifice, and that would be their drink offering. You can imagine, you put liquid on something really hot, what happens? You get smoke and steam. And that would be the offering to take their very expensive prized drink, pour it on the sacrifice, and the smoke would rise into heaven as an offering of incense to God. And he said, even if I'm being poured out as a drink offering, yet I will rejoice. Now, I know a lot of people think that he's talking about his martyrdom, and he did get martyred. He was talking about his martyrdom, but when he would actually give his life, I'm going to tell you, I believe he was not talking about his ultimate death as being a sacrifice. He's talking about the way he lives his life, that he's going to live his life ultimately sold out to God. His ultimate death was not his sacrifice in his mind. It was his daily life that was a sacrifice. This is why Paul said elsewhere, you offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, and this is your spiritual act of worship. Worship isn't just lifting your hands or to a holy God or singing a bunch of songs, but worship is every single day offering your life wherever you are, even chained up in a Rosen prison, as an offering to God. How could Paul be locked up in prison, chained to a Roman guard, and offer praise and worship to him? Well, let me tell you how it could do that. Paul was not in the center of his own story. Jesus was. And because Jesus was the center of his story, they could take a negative circumstance, and Paul would change his perspective in such a way that it would impact what God was able to do through his negative in circumstances. That's why Paul said this, and don't miss the power of what he says. Here he is, chained up 24 hours a day, a different Roman guard every 8 hours. Here's a new one over and over again. Here's what Paul says. Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me was actually served to advance the gospel. Sitting in prison, chained between two guards, and he's saying it served to advance the gospel. Changed his perspective, and he's seen the power and the goodness of God in it. What's happened to me has actually moved the message of Jesus forward. Look, he's got 3 soldiers a day, new ones. Every 8 hours, he gets a new audience to proclaim the gospel to. He's chained to them. It's not like they can go anywhere. So he can share the gospel with them. Think about that. 3 guards a day hear the gospel message. And I'm sure some of them accepted Jesus, their Savior and Lord, and they went out and shared their gospel message. Yeah, God doesn't necessarily do it the way we want him to, but you know what? It works. As a result, it's become clear through the whole palace guard. All those soldiers, they knew it. Everyone else knows it. What do they know? They know that I am in chains for Christ. What was he saying? He's saying, you think that I'm the prisoner here? Let me tell you the real prisoner here. Every 8 hours, I get fresh meat, virgin ears. I get someone new, one of the most powerful people in all of Rome, chained up to my arm for an 8-hour sermon that I write new for each and every one of them. You think I'm the prisoner here? You got no idea how God is using what others could see as negative to advance the gospel. In other words, this isn't my plan. This isn't what I would have chosen. And there's a lot of reasons why I would probably complain about this. Because I can't change my circumstances, I am changing my perspective. I'm going to use where God put me to bloom. I knew that my God works in all things to bring about good according to his purpose to those who love him and are called according to his power. I see my God doing something. I don't know who this is going to speak to, but if you're in a place like you don't like, and you recognize God still has a plan, God still has a purpose, and God still has an assignment, it may not be what you choose. It might not be what you ever want. It may be the last thing you would ever choose to do. Doesn't mean God can't use it to get the message of his goodness being pushed forward. There used to be a lady in my church. And she got very, very ill. She was very, very elderly. In the hospital. And she was ready to go home. In the first couple of days there, she complained because she was just expected to go home any moment, and she didn't see why Jesus was leaving her there. Finally, the pastor came by to talk to her, and he talked to her for a little while, and she was telling him her concerns, and he says, has a plan. Maybe God has use for you here. Maybe, just maybe, you're not done, and he's got a message for you here. Well, it really convicted her. And so she began to share her faith with anybody who came in the room. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, visitors, didn't matter. For 5 days, she proclaimed the gospel of Jesus Christ. Finally, she passed on and went home to be with the Lord. And at her funeral, 22 hospital employees accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior and Lord. God wasn't done with her yet. She didn't have a right to complain because God had a plan for her, just like he has for us. And when you're in the middle of a hole that you don't know how you're going to get out of, you can do something. If you can do something about it, do something about it. But if you can't, use the circumstances and change your perspective. If you can do something about it, do something. But if you can't, change your circumstances and change your perspective. Change the way you look at it. Change the way you think about it. Change the words that you speak about it. Rather than complaining about something,